Generating traffic and sales can be a challenge for online merchants. But selling on the Walmart Marketplace puts your products in front of millions of customers who shop on Walmart.com. And right now, sellers who join Walmart Marketplace can save up to 50% on referral and fulfillment fees for the first 90 days. So get started today. Head over to marketplace.walmart.com/savings. That's marketplace.walmart.com/savings.
Welcome to E-Commerce Conversations, a podcast by Practical E-Commerce.
This is Kerry Murdoch with Practical E-Commerce. Selling across international borders can provide helpful revenue to many merchants. But the complexity of laws, transit times, and even cost can be daunting. My guest today is an authority on international shipping and logistics. He's Dr. Eugene Laney, Head of International Government Affairs with DHL, the worldwide delivery firm. Well, Eugene, welcome to the podcast.
Hello. Good afternoon.
Eugene, you're an expert in international logistics. Our audience is mainly small to mid-size e-commerce merchants in the U.S. and even worldwide. My first question for you today, Eugene, is should small to mid-size merchants even try to sell products across borders?
I would say yes, with giant applause around that. 95% of all consumers live outside of the U.S. If you're a U.S. e-commerce company, you should definitely look to sell across border. If you think about what the demand is in places like Australia, where they demand a lot of U.S. products, textiles, apparel, a lot of electronics, footwear. If you look in the EU, where they want a lot of our the U.S. electronics, they want a lot of our toys, a lot of the gadgets that we enjoy every day. There's places like EU and Australia that really demand those products. There's also places like Africa where you see the population between the age of 25 and 35 all have mobile phones, and they're all trying to figure out how to engage in m-commerce, or what we call mobile commerce. So they have a direct access to products that they normally couldn't get in their country. So they have an interest in trying to get a lot of the clothing, a lot of the equipment, technology that U.S. Folks use every day, as well as other countries. So you have Africa as an emerging market. You also have Southeast Asia, where again you have the same situation. You have a growing youth population that wants access to a lot of products and services that are outside of their country, and so e-commerce is the perfect way for them to gain access to those products and services.
It seems there's uncertainty. Merchants have uncertainty when it comes to selling across borders. Say an order comes in from a country that a merchant is not familiar with. Say the merchant's in the U.S. The order comes in, he's not sold or shipped to that country. How can he know or she know if it's worth the trouble to ship there for shipping cost and customs and that sort of thing?
Well, I think even in the beginning, when you first determine that you want to start selling overseas, you have to identify which markets would have an interest in your product. And so when you've sort of done like a test case to see, for example, if I have a certain toy that I know it's going to do really well in Estonia, or I know it's going to do really well in Vietnam, I need to know the 3 W's is what I call it. That's the who, what type of customer is going to want that product, what I need to do to ship it there, and then where do I need to ship it? So you need to know your 3 W's before you go into a market, and that kind of market analysis will help you avoid some of the dangers that are out there. For example, I have worked with a customer who had an interest in selling beauty products, and the beauty product was a wipe, and a makeup wipe, and it cost $1. And she set up her website, started selling it, but then she realized that the shipping cost when someone would purchase that wipe overseas was $6. So she completely ate, $5. It didn't help her with her profit margin at all. But what she learned was that she learned where people had an interest for a product, and then she also learned that they didn't just want one; they wanted several. So she was able to build in that shipping cost and sell them a package of 15 wipes versus one, which would then give her a profit as well as cover those shipping costs. So you really have to know exactly where your market is, and then sort of build in those costs, those shipping costs that might come with shipping the product.
Any tips on how a merchant can determine where those markets are?
Well, one of the most important thing to do is to, I've always recommended when you start shipping cross border, start with the countries that are closest to you. So, if you're a U.S. e-commerce company, I would begin by looking at Canada and Mexico. So there you have two test cases that can really reflect the larger global population of demand, is the best way of describing it. So in Canada, you have, of course, a developed country where there's a huge demand for a lot of consumer products. Mexico, you have a developing country where there's you have some demand, but not high demand. But then there's an opportunity for you to identify how your product might fit in those countries. So if you do well in Mexico, then you may want to expand further into Latin America, or you may want to take a huge leap and go into Southeast Asia. And then, of course, if you do well in Canada, then that opens up an opportunity for you to then sell into Europe, where you have sort of a common market and common interest. So doing that deep dive into selling in markets closer to you then also reduces your shipping costs, because then if you're learning while you're going along, you're not taking a huge hit on sending your product all the way to Botswana somewhere, then learning that the costs are too high. You're learning as you go by working with the countries that are closest to you. And so that's what I always recommend, is start off with the countries closest to you and then begin to align those markets with common markets across the globe.
You mentioned the example there of Canada and Mexico. Most merchants, U.S. merchants anyway, are certainly familiar with shipping to Canada. Pardon me. Is the shipping cost roughly the same? What's the cost, say, going into Mexico? I mean, does it approximate the same cost as going into Canada? Is it more?
Well, it depends. So there's a lot of things that goes into a shipping cost. So you want to you of course you have the transportation costs, but then you may have some taxes and duties, some customs taxes and duties that might be assigned to your product. So that's the part of the what of your three W's of knowing what your product is. Does it require a license? Is it high compliance around that product? There was a gentleman who came up with a great idea of selling a treadmill underneath your desk. He wanted to sell it all over the globe. There was demand for it, but what he learned is that treadmill needed a license in most countries, and it also required a fee because most countries viewed it as a almost like a drug, as it was helping someone develop their health. So you have to really understand what your product is, where you're selling, because there might be additional costs that might be tied to that product. So just comparing Canada to Mexico, yes, the transportation costs might be similar, but there might be additional customs, duties, taxes, and licensing fees that might add to those costs.
Now, in that example of the treadmill, I would have never, if I were selling that treadmill, I probably would have never guessed, without talking to someone like yourself, that there are differing customs duties on that. How, as an unsuspecting merchant, how can he determine that? How can he know?
Well, that's the challenge when you're an e-commerce, small e-commerce company trying to jump out there. The most important thing is to leverage your logistics provider who's helping you ship that good. Mm-hmm. So a lot of logistics providers like DHL, we can provide you with all of the compliance materials and understanding of what you need to have as far as documentation, what you need to pay when you're trying to ship a good from the U.S. or from anywhere. So we'll help you understand what you need in order to get that good across the border. So that's part of it. The other part is really leverage your relationship with your company's government authorities. So a lot of government authorities, particularly the U.S. government, as well as the U.K. does a great job too, in listing products, what the requirement is in different countries to send that product, whether you need a license, whether there's a fee associated with it, whether it's denied and it's a restricted product. You can't sell it into some countries. Even in some, it's the interesting story I always tell is some African countries it's illegal to sell umbrellas into the country. So you would say, well, why is that? In some African countries, umbrellas are viewed as a luxury good. So they don't want, umbrellas coming in because, umbrellas, of course, protect you from sun damage. So there's a restriction on the number of umbrellas that come in because they're trying to protect the domestic market of domestic sellers of umbrellas. So those types of intricacies is something that you can only learn if you build a relationship with your government authorities to be educated on that, as well as leveraging your logistics provider who, has all the knowledge to help you understand how to get your good into the country.
So in that example, a merchant selling umbrellas into Africa using DHL to ship them there, how would that interaction work? So would the merchant would need to disclose to DHL I'm doing umbrellas, or how would your company know to advise the merchant what's going on?
So it could happen in a number of ways. One way is that a lot of times we have this giant book that we have that lists all of the restricted items in most of the 220 countries that we serve. So a lot of times our service center or the person that's picking up the package or wherever it's being dropped off, there could be a flag that says, this is a restricted item, and these requirements are needed in order for you to get that good through. It can happen that way, or if you've already developed a relationship with your DHL representative, the sales representative, then they can educate you on the challenges that you might have to get into a country. We work with a lot of medical device companies that sell over via e-commerce, and so one of the challenges that they have is that a lot of medical devices can't fly on passenger airplanes. So our sales reps are always educating those e-commerce companies on, hey, we need to come up with a solution that helps you get this product on a cargo plane versus a passenger plane, so that we can ensure that it actually gets into that African nation.
You mentioned resources of the U.S. government and even the United Kingdom. Where are those available? How can a merchant see those? Are they available online? Do they contact a certain U.S. government agency?
So here in the U.S., the Department of Commerce has a U.S. Commercial Service Office in every major city, and their job is to basically help U.S. exporters grow their business. So if you're a medium-sized or a small e-commerce company, whatever you're trying to sell, if it's toys or if it's jeans or if it's some new widget, you can contact your local U.S. Commercial Service office, and they can help you learn not only everything that you need to sell in a particular market, but they can actually be an advocate to help ensure that you get your product to the right place when you're trying to ship it there. The UK, United Kingdom, Canada, most of the big countries have a sort of a U.S. Sort of like a commercial service office that can help small and medium-sized businesses learn how to export abroad, and that can be found on the internet.
And that's referred in the U.S. That's called commercial service.
Yeah, the U.S. Commercial Service Office. It's under the. You can find it at export.gov.
Export. Okay, good. That's terrific. Switching gears just for a sec on logistics, warehousing, and logistics. At some point, if a merchant is achieving enough volume in a certain country or region, at some point it makes sense to warehouse products there. A couple of questions on that scenario. How does a merchant know, or how can a merchant determine if it's worthwhile to have a second warehouse operation in a foreign country? And secondly, does DHL provide those logistics warehouses?
So to answer the second question first, yes, DHL, we have a sister company that provides warehousing for e-commerce companies as well as other companies that are interested in housing their product in a country and then shipping it out from there. But as far as a medium-sized e-commerce company making that determination, this is the toughest decision that a e-commerce company has to make once it's starting to really take off. And so one of the challenges that they have is they have to determine what is the what are the existing regulations on warehousing in certain countries. So, for example, in India, you can have a warehouse there, but you can't own it. So the decision that an e-commerce company has to make is, do they want to sort of subcontract out their customer service, subcontract out their supply chain out to a third party in a warehouse in India to help them, distribute their goods throughout India, or do they want to stay away from, working in India because they can't have access and have control over what's going on in country? That's the biggest challenge, is the control piece of whether you want to ensure that you have control over your warehouse when you decide to move overseas. And then if you've determined that there are regulations that are softened enough where you can have your warehouse there, you can control your inventory, then of course you should take the leap and then make the determination of setting up warehousing. But I think the biggest challenge that a lot of companies have failed. You can look at a whole list of e-commerce companies that have failed, particularly going into India. They've tried to, subcontract their warehousing, and then what they've learned is that their customer service has gone down. They can't control their inventory because they lose the ability, to really be on site and really manage, the movement and the flow of goods in and out of their warehouse. And so a lot of companies are taking a step back and saying, you know what, maybe we need to attach ourselves to a larger platform, your Amazon, Etsy's, Pitney Bowes or others, that warehousing, and then help you sort of take the next steps.
That makes sense. You mentioned a sister company. What's the name of that company?
So we have DHL Global Forwarding as well as DHL E-commerce.
Okay, so that's the warehouse.
Yes, those are the two companies that can help you depending on your volume.
Okay, cool. To help our listeners understand more about timing and cost, I'm gonna describe a hypothetical scenario to you. Say I'm a U.S. or Canadian merchant. I sell apparel items, and I've got orders coming in from Western Europe. If I ship those on DHL, what are the transit times? What's the rough cost, custom requirements, etc.?
So I have to stay away from pricing discussions, but I'll work around that. So for Western Europe, where we've talked before, like the global expectation of delivery or when your package gets there is 2 weeks. Okay. In most countries they can accept that they don't get a good for 2 weeks, but in Western Europe, of course, it's just like the U.S. We're all associated with the Uber effect now. We want things the same day. So the expectation of delivery is higher. So you sort of have three options when you're dealing with Western Europe. In the same way if you're dealing with the U.S., you could have your standard delivery. Again, that could be 2 to 4 days or when it gets there. You could have express delivery. That's again, you have to make the determination of whether you want to charge a premium for that express delivery, and that's for someone who feels like that they have to have their pair of shoes today. They have to have their vitamins tomorrow. They really want that express delivery. That might change based on the product that you're selling. So you have to determine what is looking at the market demand, what does my customer want? And then of course the third is with the new emerging way, and that's the alternative delivery option. And that's the idea that, okay, I want my product, but what I want you to do, I want you to send it someplace else, send it to a locker, put it in my car, take it somewhere else, and I'll pick it up, tomorrow. I'll pick it up 2 days from now, but I just want to make sure that it's available for me. So it's the availability piece, the idea that I can get it whenever I want to. So those three options is what you have to look at when you're looking at a market. You have to really understand what is the expectation of delivery for that customer in that particular market. As I noted, in Africa, they can wait 10 days for their product or 3 weeks. In Asia, they can wait a little less, 7 days. In Europe, it's totally different, particularly Western Europe. They're like the U.S. They want their things as soon as possible.
Express delivery, is that next day?
That would be next day. That's correct. Okay. And then in some cases, there are also a number of models out there where, similar to the Amazon Prime, where it's same day. So we get back to your original warehousing, your previous warehousing question. There are some e-commerce companies now that have warehouses countries where they get the fulfillment and they try to send it to you to get it to you the same day. And so a lot of e-commerce companies are doing that in markets that they're doing really well in. They're offering the same day service.
Without addressing specific dollar cost on a percentage basis, take another run at cost to see if you're able to address this. Say a merchant ships a good in standard, say 2 to 3 day from California to New York, and then a merchant that ships one from New York to Paris. Is New York to Paris percentage basis a lot more expensive?
Oh yeah. International shipment is definitely because again you're dealing with if you look at the total cost, so you're then building in your shipping costs, potential customs, taxes, and duties, those types of things. It's going to be a significant higher cost to ship international versus domestic. Yep. And then you have more, and competition comes into play in that also. So from New York to Los Angeles, there's enormous competition. You have a lot of different players that you can use to ship a good from New York to Los Angeles, so the prices are sort of managed in a lower fashion, as opposed to going from New York to Paris. There are not a lot of players like that can get your good there the next day, or even, I would say, maybe within a week. So the prices might be a little bit higher.
A lot of merchants, most merchants, certainly in the U.S. and Canada and Western Europe, are used to having shipping providers, the software integrated in their shopping carts, or their checkout process, so that when a customer, adds a good to the shopping cart and prepares to check out, if there's a fee, it's calculated right there, and the customer knows that. DHL has so much international expertise. Do you have a similar integration for merchants that want to ship internationally?
So we have what we call a trade automation service that could be built into a lot of our customers' networks. It could provide a number of services. The landing cost calculate can help you estimate your taxes and duties, your import fees. It can help with product compliance, as I spoke to before, understanding what documentation you might need to get into the country. It can also help with denied party screening. So, for example, this is a big issue now with all of the sanctions that you see that are going on with Russia and North Korea and others. So, if you're trying to send something somewhere, and then you're using, our trade automation service, it'll help you to understand whether that person is on a denied party list or whether that product is on a restricted list. So we have a service that can really help a customer around compliance, as well as understanding the exact cost to send a good from one place to the other.
Is there an API or an integration available for the trade automation service? I mean, how does that work? Does it sync with the merchant?
You're really jumping into the technical piece there. I'm not an expert on the IT piece, so I would have to ask our IT folks. But they have worked. The trade automation service has been a great tool that a lot of e-commerce companies have used to really increase their business and, more importantly, improve their compliance. Because if you think about it, if you're sending something and it's restricted, or you're sending something and it's denied, once it gets over to that other country, you then have to figure out how to get it back to the U.S. Or worse than that, your customer's upset that it didn't arrive at their door. So it helps save costs. It helps reduce, a lot of customer service complaints. So it's a very great tool.
You mentioned sanctions. President Trump, of course, has imposed, or is at least threatening to impose, tariffs, trade tariffs. Is that affecting international commerce right now?
Well, what we're seeing is that it's having an enormous effect on, of course, your larger companies. I mean, they have to, since they're doing a lot of shipping, a lot of manufacturing, and they need a lot of those inputs that are coming from China to build goods. It's their duties, the number of duties that they're paying now has increased. But more importantly, it's hurting small and medium-sized businesses, and particularly, I would say, a lot of e-commerce companies, because if you think about it, a lot of the circuits and a lot of the technical products that are on a number of those tariff lists are needed in order to create your servers and your back office equipment And so as those costs go up, then those costs are passed on, to consumers as well as your e-commerce companies that are out there trying to, buy new servers, buy new computers, and as well as create new products. So if you're creating a toy that requires silicon, that requires aluminum, then you also are getting hit by those tariffs. So it's having an impact on sourcing as well as the cost of paying some of those duties. And for a small and medium-sized business, whether you're an e-commerce company or you're the manufacturer that's selling that product to an e-commerce company, which in then turn sells it to the consumer, at the end of the day, you're not aware of how to manage the complexity of getting around these tariffs. You can't hire a customs broker, you can't hire a trade compliance attorney. It's just you in some cases. At an SME, the CEO is also the logistics person. It's also the salesperson.
Mm-hmm.
You're wearing many hats. So the complexities of some of these tariffs makes it very difficult for a small and medium-sized enterprise, particularly an e-commerce company, to really understand how this is impacting them. Where do I source my good? Where do I find that widget that I want to sell on my site? If I'm selling toys, does this mean I'm no longer going to receive this toy from this toy company because they're going out of, they may go out of business because they can't source the inputs they need to build a toy. So those kinds of things is what, could be an impact, the end impact of a lot of these tariffs. And so we've been working really hard to try to, educate the Congress as well as the Trump administration on the impact, so that we could try to find a way to really increase trade, and really help the consumers as well as small and medium-sized businesses.
Anything else on your mind today, sir? You have just another minute or two left.
Yeah, I wanted to leave off mainly on the I wrote down the 5 most important things to think about when you're a small and medium-sized e-commerce company. I deal with them quite often, and so I've always jotted down these 5 things when you're getting started. Most important, know your product. You have to know your product. Is there compliance around that product? Is there licensing around that product? Is it acceptable in certain countries? That's the big thing. Is there demand for it? Make sure before you get started, you map your supply chain. You get an understanding of which logistics provider you want to work with. What airports you go through, what ports you go through, how it's going to be finally delivered. Who owns the information and the data that you're sending to, your customer that's overseas, the credit card information, the financial information. How is that being, distributed? How is that being supplied? And then building a good trade compliance program. I know you might be an SME, you might be the compliance person as well as the CEO, as well as the attorney and all those. But you have to understand what are the risks around sending my product abroad. And again, that gets back to knowing your product, knowing where it's going, and knowing who it's going to. And then finally, the most important thing that I always recommend is leverage your relationship with your government authorities. There are a lot of programs, that governments provide for small and medium-sized business to learn how to export, and they're free programs. And so you can go to a seminar or a webinar, attend a webinar, and learn how to export, as well as learn which markets might be the best fit for your product. So those are sort of the takeaways that I would give.
Okay. Well, for purposes of our listeners, I've been visiting with Dr. Eugene Laney. Eugene is head of International Government Affairs for DHL, the worldwide shipping and logistics company. That website, of course, is simply dhl.com. And Eugene Laney, thank you, sir, for your time today.
Thank you.